The letter from the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association landed in my mailbox on a Tuesday afternoon, just as the first major snowstorm of the season was brewing over northeastern Pennsylvania. I stood there in the cold December air, my breath forming clouds as I read the ridiculous demands typed out in bold Arial font. And I knew my life in this neighborhood was about to get a whole lot more complicated. I'm Derek Patterson, and I bought my house at the end of Willow Creek Drive about 3 years ago. It was a modest 2-story colonial with a detached garage, but the real selling point was the property itself. 2 acres of land, which in this densely packed subdivision made me something of a land baron. The previous owner had run a small landscaping business from the property, which meant I inherited not just the house, but also a sizable equipment barn, a commercial-grade plow truck, and various other tools of the trade. The equipment barn sat about 50 yards from the main house, a metal structure that housed the 2019 Ford F-350 with a heavy-duty plow attachment, a smaller Kubota tractor with its own blade, various snow blowers, and enough landscaping equipment to start my own business if I wanted to. I worked in IT remotely, so the equipment mostly just sat there, though I did plow my own driveway and occasionally helped out my immediate neighbors when the snow got bad. That was my first mistake, apparently, being helpful. The letter in my hand, signed by one Patricia Henderson, HOA president, informed me that since I owned commercial snow removal equipment and had been observed using it for the benefit of select residents, I was now obligated to provide snow removal services to all HOA board members and their designated properties free of charge. The letter cited some obscure clause about equitable sharing of resident resources and threatened fines of $500 per occurrence if I failed to comply. I read it 3 times, certain I was missing something. The HOA in Meadowbrook Hills had always been annoying, but this was a new level of absurdity. They wanted me to plow 12 different driveways, including Patricia's quarter-mile-long driveway that serviced her oversized McMansion on Oak Ridge Court, all for free, simply because I owned a plow truck. The snow started falling that evening, thick wet flakes that accumulated fast. By morning, we had about 8 inches on the ground with another 4 expected throughout the day. I was up at 6, coffee in hand, watching the neighborhood slowly disappear under a blanket of white. My driveway needed clearing, and I knew several of my actual friends on the street would appreciate help. I was just finishing up my own driveway around 8 when Patricia herself pulled up in her black Escalade, somehow having made it down her unplowed driveway through sheer force of will and 4-wheel drive. She rolled down her window, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the weather, her face pinched with that particular expression of entitled irritation I'd come to know well from HOA meetings. "Derek Patterson," she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut through the sound of falling snow. "Did you receive the notice from the association?" I leaned against my truck, still warm from running. "I got a letter, if that's what you mean. Then you know you're required to clear the board members' driveways. I expect you at my property within the hour." She said it like she was ordering a pizza, completely matter of fact. "Patricia, with all due respect, I'm not plowing anyone's driveway for free. I have my own property to maintain." Her expression hardened. "The association has made its position clear. You have equipment that can benefit the community, and as a resident, you're obligated to share resources equitably. It's in the bylaws." "I've read the bylaws cover to cover," I said, which was true. I'd spent a boring weekend doing exactly that after they tried to fine me for having my trash cans visible from the street 30 minutes past collection time. There's nothing in there about forced labor or commandeering private property. Patricia's smile was thin and cold. Section 12, Paragraph 7, Subsection C clearly states that residents with specialized equipment must make reasonable accommodations for community benefit. This is a reasonable accommodation. That section is about lending a ladder or a power washer, not providing ongoing free services. And it specifically says reasonable accommodations, not mandatory labor. I see you want to be difficult about this. Patricia's fingers drummed on her steering wheel. Fine. Consider this your first violation. That's $500. When you fail to plow my driveway by 10 a.m., that'll be your second violation. Another $500. She drove off before I could respond, her Escalade fishtailing slightly as she navigated the snowy street back toward her castle on the hill. I stood there in the falling snow, anger building in my chest. 3 years of dealing with this HOA and their petty tyrannies had worn my patience thin. The citations for lawn height being a quarter-inch too tall. The fine for parking my own truck in my own driveway because it was classified as a commercial vehicle despite being registered for personal use. The attempted violation for having a bird feeder that was supposedly attracting nuisance wildlife. But this was different. This wasn't a stupid rule about mailbox colors or fence heights. This was demanding free labor, trying to turn me into their personal snow removal service because they were too cheap to hire an actual company. My phone rang. It was Tom Rodriguez, my neighbor from 3 houses down. Hey Derek, sorry to bother you, but I threw my back out yesterday. Any chance you could hit my driveway today? I can pay you, of course. Don't worry about it, Tom. I'll be over in 20 minutes. That was the thing. I didn't mind helping people. Tom was a good guy, a retired teacher who always waved when I drove past, who'd brought over cookies when I first moved in. His wife Sandra volunteered at the local animal shelter. They were actual neighbors, not entitled board members who thought owning a house on a larger lot meant they could dictate how others lived their lives. I spent the next 2 hours plowing driveways for the people I actually cared about. Tom's driveway, then the Kowalski family next door who had 3 little kids and 2 working parents. Old Mrs. Chen at the corner who must have been 90 if she was a day. My buddy Marcus, who'd helped me move furniture last summer. By 11 a.m., my phone started buzzing with texts from an unknown number. I ignored them while I finished clearing Marcus's driveway. When I finally checked, there were 7 messages, each more threatening than the last. Patricia had apparently gotten my number from the HOA directory. This is your final warning. You are now in violation of 3 separate citations. The board will be pursuing legal action. Your fines now total $1,500. This is your last chance to comply. The board has voted unanimously to pursue full legal remedies. You'll be hearing from our attorney. I screenshot all of them and forwarded them to my own lawyer, Jennifer Park, who had kept on retainer specifically because of this HOA. She'd helped me fight off 2 previous citation attempts, and I had a feeling I was going to need her expertise again. She called me back within 15 minutes. Derek, what did you do to piss them off this time? I explained the situation while I drove back to my house. Jennifer listened without interrupting, and I could hear her typing in the background. Okay, so this is interesting, she said finally. They're claiming Section 12, Paragraph 7, Subsection C, which I'm looking at right now. This is absolutely not what that clause means. It's about borrowing equipment for emergency situations, not conscripting residents into free labor. This is actually potentially illegal under Pennsylvania labor laws. So I'm good to ignore them. Well, yes and no. You're legally in the right, but they can still make your life hell with nuisance citations and fees. We'll fight it and we'll win, but it's going to cost you time and money. These HOA boards count on people giving in because fighting back is exhausting. I'm not plowing Patricia Henderson's driveway for free, I said flatly, or any of the other board members. They can hire a service like normal people. I support that decision. Let me send them a cease and desist on the threatening texts and the bogus fines. In the meantime, document everything. Every interaction, every text, every letter. If they want to play hardball, we'll bury them in documentation. The snow kept falling. By evening, we had 14 inches total, and the forecast called for another storm system coming through over the weekend. I plowed my driveway again and made another round to my friends' houses. Each time I drove past Oak Ridge Court, I could see Patricia's massive driveway, completely unplowed, her Escalade parked at an awkward angle near the garage where she'd apparently abandoned it. Part of me felt a little bad. Only a little. She'd hired this fight, not me. The next morning, I woke to find an official-looking envelope taped to my front door. Inside was a notice of violation and fine assessment printed on HOA letterhead. According to the document, I now owed $2,500 for 5 separate violations of HOA bylaws. They'd apparently decided that each board member's unplowed driveway constituted an individual violation. I took a photo and sent it to Jennifer. Her response was immediate. Do not pay anything. I'm filing a response today. I went about my normal routine, working from my home office, taking breaks to look out at the winter wonderland outside. Around 2 p.m., I noticed Patricia's Escalade slowly making its way down her still unplowed driveway, scraping and sliding. She must have been desperate to get out. My phone rang. Unknown number. I considered ignoring it, but curiosity won out. Derek Patterson, a woman's voice said, and it took me a moment to realize it wasn't Patricia. This is Carol Bennett from the HOA board. I wanted to reach out about this situation. Carol was the vice president, a middle-aged woman with graying hair who'd always seemed relatively reasonable in the few interactions I'd had with her. She worked as a nurse at the local hospital and generally kept her head down at HOA meetings while Patricia ran the show. I'm listening, I said carefully. Look, I'm going to be straight with you. I didn't support this resolution that Patricia pushed through. Neither did 2 other board members. But Patricia called an emergency meeting while we were at work, and she got a quorum with herself and her 2 supporters. This whole thing is ridiculous, and I want you to know that not all of us agree with it. Why are you telling me this? Because Patricia is going to escalate. She always does. And I wanted you to know that if this goes to a full board vote at the next official meeting, you'll have support. But in the meantime, she's going to make your life miserable. She's already talking about putting a lien on your property for unpaid fines. She can try. My lawyer will bury her in paperwork. I believe it. Just be careful. Patricia doesn't handle being told no very well. Carol hung up and I sat there processing the information. So there was internal division on the board. That was useful to know. The weekend storm hit Friday night into Saturday, dumping another 10 inches of snow. Sunday morning dawned cold and clear, the sun glinting off snow-covered streets. I spent a few hours clearing my own property and helping my usual neighbors. The physical work felt good, therapeutic even. There was something satisfying about the scrape of the plow blade against pavement, the way the snow rolled off to the side in perfect white curls. I was just finishing up Marcus's driveway when a police car pulled up behind my truck. My heart sank. Officer Davis stepped out, a guy I'd actually gone to high school with back in the day. "Derek," he said, looking uncomfortable, "got a complaint I need to check out. Let me guess." Patricia Henderson. How'd you know? She's been harassing me all week about plowing her driveway for free. Davis sighed and pulled out a notebook. She's claiming you've been blocking her driveway with snow, preventing her from leaving her property. Says it's intentional harassment. I laughed despite the situation. Ryan, I haven't been anywhere near her driveway. I've been plowing my friends' driveways, but I've avoided that whole section of the development specifically to avoid any accusations like this. You got any proof of that? I pulled out my phone and showed him the GPS tracking app I'd started running on all my plowing trips, specifically to document my movements. Jennifer had suggested it. The map clearly showed my routes over the past week, and none of them went anywhere near Oak Ridge Court. Davis looked relieved. Okay, that's good. That's real good. Can you send me that? Already sending it to you now. Between you and me, Davis said, lowering his voice and glancing around, Patricia Henderson has called in at least 15 complaints this year about various neighbors. We all know she's just weaponizing the police for HOA disputes, but we have to respond to every call. It's getting old. Tell me about it. I'm just trying to live my life and help out my neighbors. Well, you're clear here. I'll document this and let her know we investigated. But Derek, watch your back. People like that don't quit. He drove off, and I stood there in the cold sunshine, anger simmering again. Now Patricia was trying to bring criminal charges into this, claiming I was harassing her when I'd specifically avoided her property. An idea started forming in my head. A terrible, petty, absolutely justified idea. If Patricia wanted to claim I was blocking her driveway, maybe I should show her what that actually looked like. I called Jennifer first, because I wasn't completely stupid. I explained my idea, and there was a long silence on the other end. Legally speaking, she said finally, there's nothing that says you have to clear snow from public areas adjacent to private property. In fact, many municipalities have rules about where you can and cannot put plowed snow. As long as you're not violating any local ordinances, you're within your rights to plow snow anywhere it's legal to plow snow. So if someone's driveway happened to be behind a big berm of snow that was technically on the public easement or the street, that would be legal. Derek, I'm not going to explicitly tell you to do something petty, but I'm also not going to tell you not to. Just be very, very careful about where you're putting the snow. Check the local codes first, and document everything with photos and GPS tracking. I spent that Sunday afternoon researching Monroe Township's snow removal ordinances. As it turned out, property owners were responsible for clearing sidewalks adjacent to their property, but the street itself was public right-of-way up to a certain distance from the curb. Plowed snow could legally be placed in specific areas, including the street side approach to driveways, as long as it didn't block fire hydrants or storm drains. The next snowfall came Tuesday night, a moderate storm that added 6 inches to what was already on the ground. I woke up Wednesday morning with purpose. I had a full tank of gas, a working plow blade, and a list of 12 addresses, thoughtfully provided in Patricia's original letter. I started at 6 a.m. before most people were awake. My first stop was Patricia Henderson's McMansion on Oak Ridge Court. The street itself was barely plowed, just tire tracks where people had driven through. I positioned my truck carefully, checking my GPS tracker and taking photos to document exactly where I was in relation to property lines. Then I started plowing. Not her driveway, oh no. I plowed the street, pushing all that lovely snow right across the entrance to her driveway. A perfect berm about 3 feet high, hard-packed and beautiful. I made several passes, ensuring it was solid and even. The snow completely blocked access to her driveway from the street. Someone would need to shovel it all out or bring in their own equipment to clear it. I took photos from multiple angles, showing clearly that the snow was in the public right-of-way, not on her private property. Then, I moved to the next board member's house. Richard Foster lived on Elm Street, another board member who'd apparently supported Patricia's scheme. I gave him the same treatment. A beautiful wall of snow right across his driveway entrance. 3 feet tall, packed solid. Sharon Mueller on Birch Lane was next, then David Crane on Maple Drive. I worked my way through all 12 addresses on Patricia's list, each one receiving their own custom snow berm. By 10 a.m., every single HOA board member who'd voted to conscript me into free labor had a driveway they couldn't access without significant effort. The satisfaction I felt was immense. Petty? Absolutely. Justified? I thought so. Legal? According to my research and my lawyer's careful non-advice, yes. I drove home and parked my truck in the garage, then went inside to make breakfast and start my work day. My phone stayed silent until about 11 when it started blowing up. Patricia called first. I let it go to voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. Text messages started pouring in. You will remove that snow immediately. This is harassment and I'm calling the police. The board will see you in court. You're going to regret this. Then Richard Foster called, his voice tight with anger. I know it was you, Patterson. Get over here and clear this snow right now. Sorry, Richard. I'm not a snow removal service. You might want to hire someone. The HOA demanded you clear our driveways, and I declined. What you've got blocking your driveway is snow from the public street. You're welcome to clear it yourself or hire a company. I hear there are several good ones in the area. He hung up on me. Sharon Mueller left a voicemail threatening to sue me personally. David Crane sent a text calling me various creative names. The police showed up around noon. This time it was Officer Sarah Mitchell, someone I didn't know personally. Mr. Patterson, I need to talk to you about a complaint. I invited her in, offered coffee, and pulled up all my documentation on my laptop. Let me guess, multiple people claiming I blocked their driveways. How did you know? Because I absolutely did block their driveways, legally. I showed her my research, the local ordinances, the photos showing exactly where the snow was placed, all in public right-of-way. The GPS tracking showing my routes, everything documented to an almost obsessive degree. Officer Mitchell looked through everything carefully. And why did you do this? I explained the whole situation, starting with Patricia's letter demanding free labor. I showed her the threatening texts, the fake fines, the police complaint from Officer Davis earlier in the week. I laid out the entire timeline of harassment and escalation. So this is HOA related, she said, and I could hear the exhaustion in her voice. I'm afraid so. They tried to force me to work for free. I declined. They threatened me with fake fines and legal action. And I responded by legally plowing snow into public areas that happened to make their driveways inconvenient to access. Is there actually snow blocking their driveways, or just the entrances from the street? Just the entrances from the public street. Their actual driveways are untouched. They can clear the street side berm themselves or hire someone to do it. But that's between them and whatever service they choose to hire. It's not my responsibility. Officer Mitchell closed her notebook. Okay, so technically you haven't done anything illegal. You plowed public streets and the snow ended up in a public area. The fact that it's inconvenient for specific property owners doesn't make it a crime. That's my understanding of the ordinances. But Mr. Patterson, I'm going to give you some advice off the record. This is going to escalate. You've embarrassed these people, and people like that don't let things go. Be prepared for them to come after you however they can. I've got a lawyer on retainer specifically for dealing with this HOA. I'm as prepared as I can be." She left, and I knew she was right. Patricia Henderson wasn't going to let this go. But I was so tired of being pushed around by HOA boards who thought they were tiny dictators, ruling over their fiefdoms of suburban streets and manicured lawns. My phone rang again. This time it was Carol Bennett, the nurse who'd called before. "You blocked everyone's driveways," she said, and I couldn't tell if she was angry or impressed. "I plowed public streets. What happened after that is just physics and snow. Patricia is losing her mind. There's an emergency board meeting tonight. They're going to try to impose more fines and possibly move to force you to sell your property. They can't do that. Legally, no. But they can make the process so expensive and exhausting that you might want to leave anyway. That's what happened to the Johnsons 2 years ago. The board harassed them with fines and violations until they just sold and moved. I'm not the Johnsons. I'm tired of rolling over for bullies." "Good. I'm voting against every measure Patricia proposes. I wanted you to know that, and I'm probably going to resign from the board after this. I didn't sign up to be part of some petty dictatorship." The emergency board meeting happened that night at Patricia Henderson's house, which I felt violated some kind of neutrality principle. But what did I know? I wasn't invited, obviously, but Carol texted me updates throughout the evening. Patricia had proposed a special assessment of $10,000 against my property for willful destruction of community harmony. The measure failed 3-4. Carol voted against it, along with 2 other board members who apparently also thought Patricia had gone too far. Then Patricia proposed putting a lien on my property for the accumulated fines, now totaling $3,500 with late fees and administrative costs added. That measure also failed, same vote. Finally, Patricia moved to amend the HOA bylaws to explicitly require any resident with snow removal equipment to provide services to board members. That would require a full community vote at the annual meeting, still 2 months away. Carol's final text that night was simple: "She's not done. Watch out." I slept surprisingly well that night despite everything. Maybe it was the physical exhaustion from all the plowing, or maybe it was the satisfaction of finally standing up to bullies. Either way, I was out cold until my phone woke me at 3 in the morning. It was Marcus, my buddy from down the street. "Derek, man, you need to get up. Something's happening at your equipment barn." I was out of bed and looking out the window in seconds. In the distance, I could see lights moving around my barn, flashlights or phone lights, hard to tell. "I'm calling the police," I said, already pulling on clothes. "Already did. They're on their way. But dude, I think someone's trying to break into your barn." I grabbed my own flashlight and my phone, making sure to start recording video as I headed outside. The cold air hit me like a wall, well below freezing. I could hear voices from the barn area, low and urgent. As I got closer, I could make out 2 figures near the barn door working on the padlock. My mind raced through possibilities. Random thieves. That seemed too coincidental given everything happening with the HOA. "Hey," I shouted, my voice carrying in the still night air. "Get away from there." The figures froze, then one of them turned and I saw his face in my flashlight beam. Richard Foster. One of the board members whose driveway I'd blocked. "What the hell are you doing?" I demanded, still recording. "You have no right to keep that equipment from the community," Richard said, and his voice was slurred. "Was he drunk? We're gonna use that truck ourselves since you won't." The other figure turned out to be David Crane, another board member. Both of them were standing there with bolt cutters, halfway through cutting my padlock. "You're breaking into my property," I said, making sure I was speaking clearly for the recording. "That's burglary. I've called the police." "It's not burglary if we're taking what should be community property anyway," David said, his logic completely twisted. "That's not how any of this works. That's my truck on my property in my barn. You're committing a crime." Sirens in the distance, getting closer. Richard and David looked at each other, seemed to realize the situation they put themselves in, and tried to run. But they'd parked their car at the end of my driveway, and I was between them and it. 2 police cars pulled up, lights flashing. Officers Davis and Mitchell both stepped out, along with 2 other officers I didn't recognize. "Those 2, I said, pointing at Richard and David. "They were trying to break into my barn with bolt cutters. I've got video of the whole thing." The officers took control of the situation quickly. Richard and David were handcuffed within minutes, both protesting loudly that they were being persecuted, that they had a right to access community equipment, that I was the real criminal for refusing to help my neighbors. Officer Davis took my statement and my video evidence. "Derek, I'm sorry you're dealing with this. This is way beyond HOA nonsense now. This is attempted burglary, criminal trespass, attempted theft. These guys are looking at real charges." "I want to press charges," I said firmly. "All of it. This has gone too far." The damaged padlock was photographed and collected as evidence. The bolt cutters were bagged. Richard and David were loaded into separate police cars, still protesting. I called Jennifer even though it was almost 4 in the morning. She picked up on the 3rd ring, alert despite the hour. 2 board members just tried to break into my equipment barn. Police arrested them. I have video evidence. Holy shit. Okay, don't talk to anyone except the police. I'll be at the station in an hour. This changes everything. After the police left, I couldn't get back to sleep. I sat in my living room, watching the sky slowly lighten, processing what had just happened. The HOA had escalated from annoying citations to demanding free labor to having board members literally try to steal my property. Marcus came over around 7 with coffee and bagels. "Dude, that was insane. I can't believe they actually tried to break into your barn." "I can. These people think they're entitled to whatever they want just because they are on the HOA board. They've gotten away with bullying residents for years. No one ever stands up to them. Well, they picked the wrong guy this time." The story spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. By noon, I had 3 different neighbors stop by to express support. Mrs. Chen brought soup. The Kowalskis brought a casserole. Tom and Sandra Rodriguez came over just to tell me they'd testified about HOA harassment if needed. Jennifer called me early afternoon. "Okay, so here's where we stand. Richard Foster and David Crane have both been charged with criminal trespass, attempted burglary, and attempted theft. The video evidence you provided is damning. The DA is taking this seriously because apparently both of them have prior incidents of aggressive behavior related to HOA disputes. Prior incidents. Nothing that resulted in charges, but police reports. Apparently Richard got into a screaming match with a neighbor last year about trash cans that almost turned physical, and David has multiple noise complaints filed against him for harassing neighbors about barking dogs. The police have a file on both of them. So what happens now? Now we wait for the legal system to work. Both of them will probably take plea deals to avoid trial. But here's the interesting part. I've been doing some research into your HOA itself, and I think we have grounds for a lawsuit. What kind of lawsuit? Harassment, abuse of authority, intentional infliction of emotional distress. The fake fines, the threatening texts, the police complaints they've filed against you, all of it. And now we have board members literally committing crimes related to their dispute with you. A good lawyer could argue the entire board is liable. I don't want money from them. I just want to be left alone. I understand. But sometimes the only way to stop a bully is to hit them hard enough that they can't get back up. Think about it. I spent the rest of the week working and watching the neighborhood drama unfold. The arrest of 2 board members made the local news. HOA board members arrested after alleged burglary attempt ran on the Monroe Township community website. The comments section was a goldmine of neighbors sharing their own HOA horror stories. Patricia Henderson went radio silent. No calls, no texts, no letters. I almost would have preferred her continued harassment to the eerie quiet. The HOA annual meeting was scheduled for the first Saturday in February. According to the bylaws, that's where any major decisions had to be voted on by the full community. Carol texted me that Patricia was planning to bring several measures to that meeting, including the proposed bylaw change about mandatory snow removal services. "You need to be there," Carol wrote, "and you need to bring everyone who supports you. This is going to be a showdown." I spent the next few weeks preparing. Jennifer helped me put together a timeline of every incident, every citation, every threatening communication. We compiled the police reports, the video evidence from the attempted break-in, everything. I also went door to door talking to neighbors, explaining my side of the story, asking for their support. What I found was eye-opening. Nearly every person I talked to had their own HOA horror story. The young couple on Spruce Lane who'd been fined because their Christmas lights were the wrong color temperature. The retired veteran on Cedar who'd been cited for displaying an American flag that was supposedly too large. The single mother on Pine who'd been harassed about her lawn care while she was working 2 jobs to support her kids. Patricia Henderson and her board had created a climate of fear in Meadowbrook Hills. People paid their dues and obeyed the increasingly petty rules because fighting back seemed hopeless. The Saturday of the annual meeting arrived cold and clear. The meeting was held at the community clubhouse, a building I'd never actually been inside despite living here for 3 years. I arrived 15 minutes early with Jennifer, Marcus, Tom, and Sandra Rodriguez. Mrs. Chen came too, moving slowly but determined. The room filled up fast. I'd expected maybe 30 or 40 people. Over 100 residents showed up, packing the space beyond capacity. People stood along the walls and in the doorway. The energy in the room was electric. Patricia Henderson sat at the front table with the remaining board members. Richard Foster and David Crane were notably absent, still dealing with their legal issues. Patricia looked composed, her hair perfect as always, but I could see tension in the set of her shoulders. The meeting started with standard business: treasury reports, maintenance updates, approval of last year's minutes. Patricia's voice was calm and professional as she worked through the agenda. Then we reached new business. The first item is a proposed bylaw amendment regarding community resource sharing, Patricia began, and I felt the room shift. Everyone knew this was about me. She read through the proposed amendment, which was even worse than I'd expected. Any resident with specialized equipment would be required to provide services to other residents at reasonable intervals, and for reasonable compensation determined by the board. Failure to comply would result in fines starting at $1,000. This amendment is designed to ensure that community resources benefit all residents equitably, Patricia said. We have residents with specialized equipment who refuse to assist their neighbors in times of need. I raised my hand. Patricia ignored me. I stood up. "Point of order," I said loudly. "I'd like to speak to this proposal." "You'll have a chance during the comment period," Patricia said dismissively. "No, I'd like to speak now. This proposal directly targets me, and I think the community deserves to hear the full story." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Someone in the back shouted, "Let him talk." Patricia's facade cracked slightly. "Mr. Patterson, please wait your turn." "I'll wait my turn if you explain to everyone here exactly what happened. Tell them about the letter demanding I plow 12 driveways for free. Tell them about the fake fines. Tell them about your board members trying to break into my barn." The room erupted. People who clearly hadn't heard the full story started demanding answers. Patricia tried to call for order, but the genie was out of the bottle. Jennifer stood up next to me. "My name is Jennifer Park, and I'm Mr. Patterson's attorney. I have documented evidence of systematic harassment of my client by this board, including false citations, threatening communications, misuse of police resources, and ultimately criminal activity by board members. I've prepared copies for anyone who wants to review them." She started handing out packets she'd prepared, page after page of printed evidence. The room fell into a focused silence as people read through Patricia's threatening texts, the fake fine notices, the police reports. Carol Bennett stood up from the board table. "I'd like to say something. I'm resigning from the board, effective immediately. I've served for 3 years, and I've watched this board go from an organization meant to maintain our community to a tool for personal vendettas and power trips. What happened to Derek Patterson is inexcusable. The proposed amendment is just another way to control and harass residents. I can't be part of it anymore." She walked out, and the room erupted again. 2 other board members stood up and followed her out. That left Patricia and 2 of her supporters at the table, facing a room full of angry homeowners. "Order," Patricia shouted. "I will have order." An older man in the front row stood up. I recognized him as Gerald Perkins, one of the original residents who'd been here since the development was built 20 years ago. "Patricia, I've known you since you moved here 10 years ago. You've done some good things for this community, but this has gone too far. You can't treat people like servants. You can't weaponize the HOA against residents who won't do what you want. This amendment is outrageous, and I move that we vote it down immediately." "Second," someone called out. Patricia tried to maintain control, but it was useless. The vote was called. The amendment failed with only 3 votes in favor, Patricia and her 2 remaining supporters. Over 100 residents voted against it. Then Gerald Perkins made another motion. "I move that we dissolve the current board and hold immediate elections for all positions." The motion carried overwhelmingly. Within 30 minutes, Patricia Henderson was no longer HOA president. She sat at the table looking stunned as the community she'd terrorized for years voted her out. The meeting continued for another 2 hours. New board members were elected, including Carol Bennett as president despite her resignation speech, Gerald Perkins as vice president, and several other longtime residents who'd been vocal about wanting reform. One of their first acts was to vote to rescind all fines issued against me and to send a formal apology on behalf of the HOA. As people filed out, dozens of neighbors came up to thank me for standing up to Patricia. A younger woman I'd never met grabbed my hand. "Thank you," she said, tears in her eyes. "They fined us $2,000 last year for having a vegetable garden they said violated aesthetic standards. We couldn't afford to fight it. We just paid and got rid of the garden. Seeing you stand up to them means everything." I drove home that night exhausted but lighter somehow. The weight of constant harassment was finally lifted. My neighborhood could be an actual community instead of a dictatorship. But the story wasn't quite over yet. Richard Foster and David Crane both took plea deals 2 weeks later. Richard pleaded guilty to criminal trespass and got 6 months probation, community service, and a restraining order keeping him away from my property. David took a similar deal. Both of them were also required to resign from the board and pay restitution for the damaged padlock. The bigger development came in March. Jennifer filed a civil lawsuit against Patricia Henderson personally for harassment and abusive process. She didn't sue the HOA itself, since the new board had taken corrective action, but Patricia's personal campaign against me was fair game. The case never went to trial. Patricia's lawyer took one look at the evidence we'd compiled and recommended she settle immediately. The settlement included a formal written apology, a payment of $15,000 to cover my legal fees and damages, and a requirement that Patricia resign from all HOA activities permanently. She also had to send a letter to every resident in Meadowbrook Hills explaining what she'd done and apologizing. That letter arrived in mailboxes in mid-April. I kept my copy framed in my office as a reminder. The first real spring storm of the season came in late April, a freak late snowfall that dumped 8 inches of heavy wet snow overnight. I woke up early and started my usual routine, plowing my own driveway first. Then my phone rang. It was Carol Bennett. "Derek, I know you have no reason to help the HOA after everything that happened, but we're in a bind. The community's regular snow service went out of business, and we're scrambling to find someone to clear the main roads and common areas. Would you be willing to do it? We'll pay you, of course. Whatever the going rate is." I thought about it for maybe 2 seconds. "Yeah, I can do that. Email me the details of what needs to be cleared and I'll send you a quote." She laughed. "You're a good person, Derek Patterson. Better than we deserved. Not better than you deserved. Better than Patricia Henderson deserved. There's a difference." I spent that morning plowing the community streets and common areas, getting paid fair market rate for my time and equipment. When I finished, I made my usual rounds to my neighbors' houses, helping out Tom and Sandra, Mrs. Chen, the Kowalskis, Marcus. As I was finishing up Marcus's driveway, Tom walked over with a cup of coffee. "Heard you're doing work for the HOA now," he said with a grin. "Getting paid to do work for the HOA," I corrected. "That's the key difference." "Still, after everything they put you through, most people would tell them to pound sand." I shrugged. "Patricia Henderson put me through hell. The HOA is just an organization, and now it's run by decent people trying to do right by the community. No point holding a grudge against the concept when the problem was always specific people abusing their power. That's very mature of you. Don't let it get around. I have a reputation as a troublemaker to maintain." We both laughed, and I climbed back into my truck. The morning sun was bright, glinting off the snow. The neighborhood looked peaceful, beautiful even in the way that only a fresh snowfall can make suburban streets look. I drove past Oak Ridge Court on my way home. Patricia Henderson's house sat there, her driveway neatly plowed by whatever service she'd hired. Her Escalade was gone, probably at work or running errands. The house looked the same as always, oversized and pretentious, but I felt nothing looking at it. No anger, no satisfaction, no lingering resentment, just indifference. She tried to bully me, I'd stood up to her, and the community had ultimately decided who was in the right. The system had worked, slowly and painfully, but it had worked. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. "Saw the HOA posted a job listing looking for a property manager. Carol says the new board wants to professionalize things so volunteers aren't overwhelmed. Progress." I smiled and typed back. "Amazing what happens when adults are in charge." The rest of that spring and summer passed quietly. The new HOA board was actually functional, focused on maintaining property values and community amenities, without the petty tyranny of the previous regime. They updated the bylaws to include clearer limits on board authority and better appeal processes for citations. Several of the old, ridiculous rules were eliminated entirely. Patricia Henderson moved away in July. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she'd taken a job in Pittsburgh and bought a condo there. No HOA to run, just a condo association where she'd be one voice among many. I hoped she'd learned something from the experience, but I didn't really care either way. She was gone, and that was enough. Richard Foster and David Crane both moved out within the year too, though I never learned exactly why. Maybe the embarrassment of being arrested and convicted was too much. Maybe their families were tired of the drama. Either way, new neighbors moved into both houses, normal people who waved hello and minded their own business. The following winter was milder than the previous one, with only a few major snowstorms. I maintained my routine of plowing my own property first, then helping out my neighbors. The HOA contracted me for community area snow removal at fair rates, and everyone was happy with the arrangement. One Saturday morning in February, exactly a year after the explosive annual meeting, I was clearing Mrs. Chen's driveway when Carol Bennett pulled up in her Subaru. "Derek, got a minute?" she called out. I shut off the plow and walked over. "What's up?" "The board wanted me to ask you something. We're planning a community appreciation day this spring, like a big barbecue and games in the park. We wanted to specifically recognize you as Resident of the Year for standing up to corruption and helping reform the HOA. I laughed. "Carol, I appreciate that, but I didn't do anything special. I just refused to be pushed around. That's exactly why we want to recognize you. Too many people let boards like the old one get away with abuse because fighting back is hard. You showed everyone that it's possible to stand up to bullies and win. The whole community is better off because you didn't back down. When you put it that way, how can I refuse?" The Appreciation Day happened in May, a perfect spring afternoon with clear skies and temperatures in the 70s. The community park was packed with families, kids running around, neighbors actually talking to each other like humans instead of living in fear of citations. Gerald Perkins, now in his second term as board vice president, gave a short speech about community values and standing up for what's right. Then he called me up to the front and presented me with a plaque that read, "Derek Patterson, Resident of the Year for Integrity, Courage, and Community Service." People clapped and cheered. My friends whooped embarrassingly loud. Mrs. Chen gave me a hug that nearly broke my ribs despite her tiny frame. Later, as the sun set and families started packing up, I sat on a park bench with Marcus, both of us nursing beers from the cooler. "Hell of a year," Marcus said. "Hell of a year," I agreed. "You ever regret it?" Fighting back instead of just doing what they wanted. I thought about it, really considered the question. The stress, the legal fees, the late-night break-in attempt, all of it. "No," I said finally, because giving in would have just made it worse. Patricia would have found something else to demand. The board would have kept pushing boundaries. Sometimes you have to draw a line and defend it, no matter how uncomfortable that gets. "Wisdom from the Resident of the Year," Marcus teased. "Shut up and drink your beer." We sat there as the park emptied out, watching the last kids chase each other around the playground, parents chatting by the pavilion. A year ago, most of these people wouldn't have shown up to a community event, too worried about getting cited for something. Now they were relaxed, happy, treating this place like an actual neighborhood instead of a prison run by petty bureaucrats. The plaque sat next to me on the bench, cheap wood and engraved plastic, probably cost $30 online. But what it represented mattered. A community that could recognize when it had gone wrong and correct course. Neighbors who could come together and support each other instead of living in fear. I thought about that first letter from Patricia Henderson, the one demanding I plow driveways for free. It was still in a file folder at my house, preserved as evidence even though the legal cases were all resolved. Sometimes I took it out and read it just to remind myself how absurd the whole thing had been. The thing about bullies, whether they're in school hallways or HOA boardrooms, is that they count on people being too tired or scared to fight back. They bank on the fact that standing up to them is exhausting, expensive, and socially risky. Most of the time, that calculation works out in their favor, but every once in a while they pick the wrong target. Someone who's just stubborn enough, just angry enough, just resourced enough to fight back. And when that happens, the whole house of cards comes tumbling down. I wasn't special. I wasn't particularly brave. I was just a guy with a plow truck who got tired of being pushed around. But sometimes that's all it takes to change everything. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky orange and pink. Marcus finished his beer and stood up, stretching. "All right, I've got to get home. Sandra's making dinner and I'm already in trouble for drinking beer all afternoon." "Thanks for having my back through all this," I said. Seriously, it helped knowing I wasn't alone. That's what neighbors are for, man. The real ones anyway. He headed off toward his house and I sat there a bit longer, enjoying the quiet evening. My phone buzzed with an email notification. The HOA's monthly newsletter sent out by the new community manager they'd hired. I skimmed through it. Updates on landscaping projects. Reminder about pool opening dates. A note about the next board meeting being open to all residents who wanted to attend. Normal stuff. Boring stuff. Exactly what an HOA should be dealing with instead of waging personal vendettas and harassing residents. I drove home as the streetlights flickered on, my truck rumbling through streets I'd plowed dozens of times over the past year. My house came into view, modest and comfortable, with the equipment barn standing solid in the back. The barn had a new padlock now, heavy-duty and expensive. Not because I was particularly worried about another break-in attempt, but because that night had taught me to take security seriously. The plow truck sat inside, clean and maintained, ready for next winter. I pulled into my driveway and sat there for a moment before getting out. Through my front window, I could see my living room, warm light glowing. My house. My property. My equipment. Mine to do with as I chose, not subject to the whims of petty tyrants who thought a board position made them royalty. That was worth fighting for. That would always be worth fighting for. I grabbed the plaque from the passenger seat and headed inside. Tomorrow, I'd find a place to hang it, probably in my office where I could see it while I worked. A reminder that standing up to bullies was possible, that communities could heal from toxic leadership, that sometimes the right amount of pettiness deployed at the right moment could change everything. And if another HOA president ever tried to demand free labor from me again, well, I had a plow truck and I knew exactly where to put the snow. But somehow, I didn't think that would be a problem anymore.